Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SISU Peak Performance Podcast. Today, we have with us Matt Rieger. He's a mental performance coach who works for advanced therapy and performance in the area of Trumbull, Southern Connecticut region. And his work involves designing mental performance programs through individual sessions, group sessions, and experiential workshops. He also works with a variety of sports and age groups, ranging from youth to the professional level. Matt, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, very excited to finally bring you here to the podcast. We're gonna talk a lot about mental performance topics that are very useful for athletes to increase their performance. And so to get started, for those that don't know you, who is Matt, and how did you come to work in the mental performance space?
Yeah, I went and have been playing sports my whole life. Baseball was my main sport that I played, and then outside of that, I always played rec basketball when I was really young, played hockey, but then also with friends, it was anything from football to volleyball to dodgeball, like always playing sports and having competitiveness to me. And as I kept getting older, played baseball more competitively, and the year before I went to college, I actually tore my labrum in my shoulder. So that was a period where I decided to take like a gap year and try to rehab that. Unfortunately, didn't make my way back from it. I just didn't have enough time from the surgery. And in that time, during that gap year, I did a lot of research of like what I wanted to do because I really didn't know what I wanted to pursue. And that's a tough question to ask someone when they're 17, 18 years old. So I really tried to make sure and maximize that year for myself. So I found some like key things that I liked, which were always listening to people's stories, when they were personal stories about their life. I really liked helping people and wanted to find something in that realm. So I originally thought it would be something along the lines of like clinical or like psychology. So that's what I got my major in undergrad, and I kept trying to find things that could be around the sports psychology realm because I didn't know that too yet at the moment, but what that could be. I actually found like the sports psychology field, and I was like, oh, this is a perfect combination of helping people, being around the sports setting, and then got my master's, applied to an internship where I am now at Advanced Therapy and Performance, and did their strength internship and pitched the idea of mental performance because they didn't have anything along that realm, and they're primarily a baseball training facility. So I said, like, hey, all pro teams have this. This is something that could be really useful. And it's been now 4.5+ years of kind of growing the mental performance division within the company. And the more I've gotten into it, the more I've found just how applicable mental skills are to everything in life. And the deeper you dive into it, of how ingrained it is in everything in your life. And it's definitely helped myself in areas of my life improve in my performance because I think everything is a performance that we do.
100%. I think that's an awesome story, and you getting injured and trying to find your way into the sport again, into life. I think that's something that a lot of athletes go through during their career. So how was it for you to experience that injury and deal with all those thoughts and things that come to mind once you have to get back on the field again?
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, I can't speak to getting back onto the field because I personally didn't. I would say during that time though, it's tough because it's something that you're doing and it's such a big part of your life that when you don't have that, you kind of lose it, like I would say, a piece of you, almost like your like part of your identity. You're away from a team, you're away from a lot of your friends because they're playing and you currently can't. So I think that's where a lot of that energy got put into rehab and trying to make your way back. And it's also a discovery for yourself of it really does test how much you want to play because now that piece of it is taken away and you're not doing it anymore. So it definitely was a challenge, but it was one that I definitely learned a lot about myself, learned about that I still wanted to play. Like I said, unfortunately, that didn't work out, but it was something that I was able to keep pursuing and enjoying the progress that I was making. And also just learned a lot about, I'm going to say, like the rehab side of coming back from an injury because it was a longer term injury that took place. So it did kind of test who I am in a lot of ways for sure.
Right. What would you say was the biggest challenge that you had to face, or what are some of the challenges that the athletes that you're working with, once they have to face an injury, are kind of like, rethink about their identity? Because as you said, you lose part of who you are, right? And you have to engage in a self-discovery journey again. So how do you manage all that?
I wish I knew more then. I think I did a pretty good job back then. I personally don't remember a time where I was super down about what happened. It also could have been because part of my rehab, I was at college when I was rehabbing. So like I had social support of like just friends that you're in a college setting always around. But I think that's a big piece of people, if like you're seeing a lot more injuries now at the high school level, they're not traveling with teams, they're not going to all the games. Sometimes they might not even be at practices. So that social aspect, and most of them are athletes. So like that aspect of not being able to move or do certain activities or hang out with friends, or even if it's something for fun of like going golfing or doing stuff like that, is really hard to not be around. And then excuse me, I think a lot of athletes don't realize how much they do for their sport that they're playing, right? They're lifting just to lift and get better to go play, or something with nutrition or something with sleep. And before there was a reason for that, where now those become almost their sport. The lifting becomes the sport, or all the attention. I had one athlete say that all of the attention now goes onto them, which feels really weird because before it was a team thing that they were doing of playing and working together. And now all of the attention of the people like the PTs they're working with, the coaches, and all of it's on solely them. And it almost feels like they're under a microscope sometimes because it's not spread out to other people. It's all of what they're doing, which could be good and bad because of that.
Right. Yeah. And I think the interactions that, the players have during that recovery process are especially important when it comes to the coaches, the physical therapists, strength and conditioning coaches, anyone that is part of the staff. And as you said, sometimes so challenging for the players to feel under the microscope, right? Every time that they come into the training room, they know that they're gonna ask them, okay, how are you feeling today, right? When you're dealing with a long-term injury, that's especially hard from an emotional standpoint, because you don't really know what to say once you get there, right? In those early stages. So I think it's very important for athletes to also, speak about how they feel. If there are days that they don't feel okay, regardless of who's coming, just, speak your truth, and be open to have conversations about how you're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the hard part. And I think we're getting to a point where people are more comfortable to express what's going on and what they're feeling and going through, which is awesome to see. And that's where it really is important to have a collaborative relationship with who they're doing their rehab with, who they're training with, and who they're interacting with, because that's who they're going to spend a lot of their time with versus, say, a mental performance coach or a counselor kind of helping them navigate the feelings. And then you can collaborate with them a lot more of how they're progressing, what's going on, and then provide a much more holistic and integrated approach to the rehab, since we know there's so many aspects to coming back from an injury.
Mhm. Is there any particular framework, Mark, that you use with your athlete when it comes to maintaining that motivation when they're dealing with a short-term or long-term injury?
Yeah, I try and go back to their why for sure. And I know that becomes a buzzword for some people, but it's kind of going and helping them get back to like the reasons that they're trying to get back. And then as well as kind of prep them that there probably is going to be a time in, if it's the rehab and it's a longer term one, that they do hit a little bit of a lull where the achievements aren't coming as fast. Not everyone, but a lot of people, that tends to happen in the middle of their rehab because it's not a new injury anymore. And they're also not super close to the end of the rehab. So they kind of feel like a lull because they're not having as many progressions. They're doing a lot of the same exercises and drills to get stronger, to prepare to return to play. So within that, I think a big piece of it that I try and do with all of them right from the beginning is having them track their wins and accomplishments daily, because now we can start seeing the progress they're making as well as what's going on and all of the accomplishments along the way, which helps them in the moment be able to notice that they are making progress and achieving things, even if they are small. But then also, when they are at the end of their rehab and trying to return to their sport, they have a notebook or notes of all the things that they did to be ready to
Mhm.
return. So when some of that doubt comes in of, am I ready, or am I prepared, or can I do this? They can go and look back of like, oh, I've done this, I did that. And they almost have like a little journal for themselves. So it really helps in the immediate and then also at the tail end when they're trying to return.
I think that's a really, really good skill or tool that the athletes can use, journaling, right? Reflect back on the progress that they're making, kind of like the self-talk that they're having during those difficult or great moments, because there are also times where they have to celebrate for sure. Um, are there any like particular questions that, an athlete can ask himself or themselves, once they start using journaling as a tool to either start to feel a little bit better or learn how to better manage those emotions or whatever they're going through in those moments?
Are you asking, do they have any questions about it?
Yeah, like do they have like any type of like again any type of framework that they use? Because I had a lot of athletes that when I talk to them about journaling, they don't really know what to write, right? They're like,
Mm,
I've never
okay.
done this before. Right, I have the paper in front of me, but I don't really know how to write. Are there any questions that can help them move forward and start with journaling?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things, and I try and I'll say at the beginning of the rehab, always ask a question of, it's easy to talk about their sport. So in my case, a lot of it is baseball. If guys, like I go back to the why, like I have them answer the question, like, what does baseball mean to me? And let them
Hmm.
go and use that as the guide to then see what it means to them, what it brings to them as a good starting point, as once again, a reflection piece for them at the start of the rehab to constantly go back to. Because it really is, especially if it's a longer term injury, anywhere from 8 to 10 to 12 months, it's easy to forget what it was or what it was like to have that excitement of playing and doing stuff. So I think that's always a good like first question to ask them of what it is. And then also throughout the rehab, like I said, it is like, what are the accomplishments or wins? And then also asking them like, hey, what am I going through maybe on a monthly basis, like once a month, asking how, like, reflect on their rehab. How is my rehab progressing? And then seeing that so they can keep going back to it. A lot of them tend to go so far into the future and want the next thing and the next thing. So if they're coming back from like an elbow injury and the big accomplishment for that month is being able to do a push up again, right? They forget about that so fast. And they're like, okay, but now I want to go and do this. Or
Hmm.
they get to throw for the first time or swing for the first time. And it's super exciting. And they've been looking forward to that for months. And then when it happens, it's like, okay, but now I want to get back onto the mound or I want to swing live. And that's within like a week.
Hmm.
So having them kind of remember those moments is super important of like, hey, like let's journal, like what was it like during your first throw, to bring in those like memories, those emotions that come because you've worked really hard for those.
Hmm. I found something that it's been helpful to us the players is what's your main goal today?
Yeah.
But what was your main goal today? Because to your point, sometimes they go so far ahead into the future that they forget all the things that they have accomplished so far. And then you get to start to help them think a little bit more about, okay, hey, maybe the reason why you're feeling this way, you're feeling disappointed right now, or you're feeling a little bit anxious, that's because your mind is going too far into the future. So asking those questions and making them reflect on the accomplishments that they had so far, it's something that they can definitely use to kind of keep themselves present and feel a little bit better for what's coming into that day.
Yeah, I love that question. You said, "What's my focus for today?" Because that's the most important piece of that rehab or that day of whatever you're doing is definitely a great question that could probably be asked every single day during the rehab. And that's where for younger athletes it might get very repetitive and a little bit boring. That's kind of what the rehab's going to be. So it could definitely set their focus really well. So I like that question.
Mhm. Following up on the focus topic, right? Obviously, it's kind of a buzzword out there where when everyone uses it all the time. We know that focus is important, right? To keep your focus is important, especially in competitive sports where you have to basically be thinking about the next action or the action that you are performing in that moment constantly, right? And I think something that we forget as coaches is that the athlete needs to do some kind of transition before they are fully focused on that training session, on the game, even sometimes during the warm-up, right? That's the way I think that the warm-ups are, besides, getting you ready physically, they're a really good moment to get you mentally ready to kind of go through some questions or sentences or things that are important during that game for you to accomplish. But there are any kind of exercises or some advice that coaches could follow as far as helping those players make that transition from, okay, I just came from school, or I just came from being with my family, my friends, and I'm getting into the ballpark, or I'm gonna be at the field, that those coaches can use to help their players make that transition.
Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where it is tough, like you said, if you're a high school athlete or a college and you're coming from school and then having to get ready right for a game, it can be challenged to kind of flip the switch to now get into a competitive mindset to go and play. And that's where being able to have set actions or routines that you do become really important within that. So I would say a big piece of that, I kind of like to work from the inside out of a performance. So I always try and help the athlete find what their ideal state is to perform, an ideal mindset. And then I can use that as the focal point to then go and tailor a pregame routine for them. Because if we don't know where we want to go, we can't get there. So if we have that framework of they need to do to perform and get to that ideal state, we can then tailor the pregame to do it. So I think it's being very intentional when you're changing into your uniform, kind of using that as your transition to being ready to play a game. Whether that's your uniform, your cleats, your bag, that's like a transition. You're taking off your school clothes or work clothes or whatever it might be, and then changing into a uniform as like a physical cue from like a body to mind transition. And then to kind of help them get into that ideal state, I'm a big fan of having different questions that they can ask themselves. So if they are someone who gets too far ahead of themselves, per se, like you talked about, they can ask, hey, like, what is my routine or process in game? And maybe they have a couple of
Hmm.
key things that they go to tell themselves. If it's someone who doesn't have a lot of confidence in themselves, they can ask themselves, how did I prepare for this performance? And then allow them to list out their preparation, whether that's mental, physical, nutritional, sleep, technical, whatever that might be. And that can allow them to say, like, hey, like, I am ready for what's going on. And then it could
Mhm.
also be questions of what are my strengths when I perform? Like I said back, what is my process to attack this team or attack this batter or attack this pitcher? Going back to a lot of things, and I think that helps control their focus a little bit better, because if we have no thoughts, or we're not controlling where our thoughts go, they're going to
Mhm.
control us. So if we can direct it with questions or statements, and that's also where you can use a motto or a slogan for yourself to then kind of direct your focus along the way. And then you can tailor those based off of the person. Some people might like to do a little bit of like pre-game like visualization or imagery of themselves performing. Some people want to do more breathing because it helps focus them and center them. There's a lot of different methods that you could do in your pregame. But I think the biggest one is, like I said, to get you back to whatever that ideal state is. So if you have to amp yourself up, you might have to go and say, use more self talk that's energizing and motivating. If you have to calm yourself down, you might go back to some more of like the breathing, maybe some imagery, and kind of saying things that are going to reassure you and kind of calm yourself down.
Mhm. I love that. I think all those are great advice to keep yourself present. And I love the sentence that you put out there on, if you don't control your thoughts are gonna control you. And it can be so easy sometimes for players to go through the motions, to not even do that exercise of thinking about what they're thinking, right? Analyze what type of thoughts they're putting into their mind, especially when it comes to important games, right? Like a playoff game, or if a player is going through a slump in those moments and they know that they have a big opportunity to turn things around in the next play or in the next at bat. Um, it's especially important to take a moment to consider, okay, what is the last thing that I'm telling myself before I perform this action, right? Am I still focused on what happened in the last play when things didn't work out for well for me? Am I thinking about the last game that didn't go too well for me, or am I actually being able to focus on what's in front of me? I actually had a conversation with a pitcher a couple of years ago when he was the starting pitcher, right, for a game, and we were walking from the clubhouse to the field. And I remember minutes before he started warming up, he was telling me that his mind wasn't in the game yet, that he was thinking about something that happened outside, and he was kind of like just talking about it, right? And obviously, at that moment, you don't really have time to get into the deep of, okay, what's going on here, right? Why is he having those negative thoughts, or what he's experiencing in those moments, because you need to get him ready for action, right? So a deal that we had was, look, regardless of the thoughts that you're having right now, or these negative scenarios that are coming unconsciously to your mind, once you step into the field, right, we use that as a physical act, or as a physical cue. You need to turn yourself and start thinking about that best version of yourself and what that could look like, right, since the
Mm-hmm.
warm up. Because whatever this problem that you're having right now, we don't have time now to process it, and to talk about it and kind of like lay it down. We'll have it after the game. Right now, I need you to focus. I need you to think about what's gonna happen in the game, because it's coming, right? It's over there. Um, so what we kind of did was design this routine where he, before actually stepping on the field, he will take a deep breath, kind of put his hat the way that he wanted it, and kind of say to himself, okay, I'm ready for this, and I'll deal with this once I'm done with the game. And I think those routines, especially when the players make it personal for them, they can really impact the way that they're thinking, and kind of transition from all that self-doubt or low confidence to kind of like get into that optimal state before they perform.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. Like I know we keep using the word focus, and I think that's the biggest thing that we have to really focus on, is because your mind can go into so many different directions, but we can only actually focus on one thing genuinely at a time, and that can be to our benefit or our detriment depending on how well you're ready for that moment, as well as if you have that focus. Like you said, if that athlete's able to say, like, I'm ready or I'm prepared or whatever that might be, that allows them to now direct their focus of what they're doing. They're in the moment, they're in the present of what they're trying to accomplish. And that's where I love creating like simple cues, or whether they're acronyms that people like, that they know
Mhm.
the words to, but they might just throw, like, put some letters together that then make something, and it just becomes that little simple cue that, like, it's probably a very detailed process, but they're simplifying it to such a small 2 or 3 word thing or acronym. Because I mean, now in many sports there's just so much information, and if you try and understand all of it and analyze it, I mean, you're gonna be overthinking a lot if you're trying to play all of the numbers games. And some people love it, some people hate it, but
Mhm.
it is there, so you have to be able to understand it and now simplify it for yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's so true. There is so much information out there from every department, and I think that's something too, that if you're working in a team sport, with nutritionists, physical therapists, coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, I think it's important to kind of like measure how much information the athlete is receiving in a particular day or in a particular week sometimes, right? Because to your point, there's so much information, and every time we ask, these athletes to, to take it, digest it, and implement it, and sometimes we cannot forget that we all have some limited capacity when it comes to remembering things or learning new concepts.
Right.
Yeah. Um, Also, Matt, something that I thought that it was very interesting. It was one of your last posts on LinkedIn when you talk about play. You said play is an act of self-abandonment. It's where we stop taking ourselves so seriously, embrace randomness, and let spontaneity take over. When we play, we're not just having fun; we're training our bodies to live with genuine excitement. As we grow older, we often take ourselves too seriously. Remember to embrace the moments of fun and playfulness in your day. It's so true. I love this post. I love this post. I think we sometimes we take ourselves too seriously.
Yeah, no, it's so difficult because yeah, as we get older, we get maybe we get smarter, but also probably to our detriment get smarter because now we know how things might play out, or we try and predict how things play out, or we get super serious and think that it's so important and this is going to make or break my season, my career, this friendship, whatever that might be. And we tend to just lose like the joy of playing. And I think that's something that sports are, that's what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be fun. They're supposed to be an exciting moment. And I think that's a lot of things that you hear from like our pro guys is like, I kind of have asked them like, when does the game not become a game anymore? And I mean, even asking high schoolers that, like, they kind of say, like, it's getting younger and younger. Like, it's 10, 9, like, maybe even younger now that they're like, yeah, like, well, once people kind of talk about playing in college, or you are playing on a travel team or a more competitive team, that it's not a game, it's kind of a career. And I think we're making, at least I can speak from the baseball side, like much more of like a business out of the sport rather than just letting people play. Um, and that's just a really hard thing to do because yeah, like we have one life, and
Mhm.
how we can go and make things fun and exciting for ourselves becomes so important, and letting those things that are supposed to be fun in games still be a game. So yeah, that post was kind of inspired from one of our like pro roundtable talks where I asked them like, hey, we're in a, like it was the middle of the off season, and I asked them like, hey, how do you make throwing like during the off season like fun? Like how do you gamify throwing a bullpen or hitting off the tee, because it's a really repetitive action. Like how what do you
Mhm.
do? And at the time there wasn't too many answers of what makes it fun. And I mean, I feel like I've seen now a lot more fun ways of throwing a bullpen. Like they're playing tic tac toe, they're playing like horse or pig with a bullpen to make it a little bit more competitive, a little bit more fun, and
Mhm.
gamifying it of, or even the game that you used to do when you were little, like you put a tee at the end of the cage and you put a ball on top of the tee, and it's a competition to see who can knock the ball off first. Like little things that bring the joy and fun out of it, and you're still getting your work in, but you're enjoying it. It's not just like, oh, I got to throw today. It's like, no, like I get to go and like have some fun with in this case like my guys, and enjoy it and have like that fun competitions going.
Mhm. Yeah, 100%. And all those moments, they kind of helps them remember, okay, why did you start playing, right? Like when you were a kid, this is a question that I always ask my players too, like, why did you start playing? Like, you remember how you started playing, who was next to you? And they usually say it was with my dad, with my brother, with a friend. And okay, what was your goal there? Just to have fun, right?
Yeah.
Just to enjoy that moment. You weren't thinking about, okay, I have an hour left in my training session now before I go home, or I have these innings left. No, you were just thinking, okay, I just want to have fun. I just want to throw the ball. I just want to hit. And it's so interesting because the more that athletes can fall into this mindset of, okay, this is an important game for me. I want to do good, but at the same time, I want to focus on having fun. If you are not having fun, it's really hard to perform at your 100%. And I think all the examples that you gave made me reflect on the fact that we sometimes overvalue we sometimes overvalue discipline and undervalue motivation. Because it's true, right? Like we put the athletes through these specific training programs that are really important for their development, and you're trying to get them to the next level, and they try to get to the next level. Um, but yeah, sometimes it's way too repetitive for the athletes, right? That's the motions, the warm-ups, the lifting sessions. So how can you make it fun? How can you change it? How can you modify something so the athlete, instead of thinking this is just one more rep, is thinking, okay, this is fun. I'm gonna try to give my best here. Because it's not only about getting yourself to the gym or getting yourself to the cages. It's also about how can you put yourself in the best state possible from a mental point to actually give yourself in that exact rep. And if you are able to have fun, that's when you really increase the likelihood of that happening.
Absolutely. Well said.
Yeah, yeah, well, it was an interesting post, and that I also think it's important to coaches to remember that, to coaches, to um any members in the staff, again, nutritionists, physical therapists, strength and conditioning coaches, sports science, and anyone that is working on sports, to or any jobs, really anything that you do, remember to have fun, right? I think sometimes we get so caught up into, we can talk a little bit about the work that you've done with coaches, but I think something that I've found out too through my experiences as well is that we sometimes forget to have fun, right? Like obviously it's professional, you care about your work, but at the same time there are also those long days where you kind of get home and you don't even remember what you did that day because you were so focused on what was next, and you kind of forget the reason why you started working on that job, or why you got into that path. So I think all those moments where you can kind of remember, okay, this is the reason why I'm doing this, I'm gonna try to have fun, that's when you cannot get that energy back once again.
Yeah, no, and that's the piece of it. And that's why it goes back to why it's so important to know, like you said, the reason you're doing something or the why for doing it, because then you can reconnect to the main purpose. And you don't have to love everything about what you're doing, but understanding that it's a step to be able to do, or it's a step of what you're doing to then get to where you want to go and be able to continue doing what you're doing. I say that all the time with kind of like being a mental performance coach, like the aspects of the conversations and the interactions and very in-depth like conversations are a lot of fun and I really enjoy those, but to be able to keep having those, I need to do other stuff, which is marketing or rapport building and like different things like that. That is work, right? And I know like that the marketing, the notes that you have to take and prepare might not be the most fun, but to be able to keep doing what you want, you have to be consistent with those things to get the conversations, get the interactions, the really cool conversations you get. It's not just they're there and you get to walk into them.
Yeah, 100%. Taking into consideration everything that you need to do to be at your best. And although sometimes those things, you might not like them as much, they help you move forward for sure. I see that you have in the back of your office, the growth mindset versus fixed mindset. That's super interesting topic from Carol Dweck. Can you talk a little bit about what? Well, first of all, why is it in there in your office, and maybe some of the work that you do with your athletes?
Yeah, I have a couple signs. I have that one. I have like the feelings wheel where it starts with like the sad, mad, happy, excited, and it branches off into different forms of those. But yeah, I think the fixed versus growth mindset is, I mean, it's such a well-known theory now and practice of what Dweck was able to create. I mean, I think even athletes without much mental performance work have heard the phrase. I know in some schools they start to teach it a little bit more now of how to go and actually implement it and kind of seeing that a lot of stuff mentally is developmental. And I think that's a good starting point in discussing the theory is a lot of people think that stuff mentally is you have it or you don't. we're starting to get to the point where people are seeing like, hey, no, like we can have more of a growth mindset and develop things like confidence, work on our self-talk, work on imagery, work on our anxieties, and go and actually improve them and learn how to manage them and respond to them better. And I think that's a testament to kind of the theory that Dweck did of, hey, like this is what a fixed one does, and this is also what a growth one does. And it really comes into play when there's adversity that comes up because right when we're doing well we can have that growth of like I can do this, I can do that. This person, if I'm competing against someone good, it's a competition, but if I'm not
Hmm.
doing well I'm probably thinking that they're better and it's more of a threat. So I think it's one of those things that it kind of helps us see when things aren't going well that we can continue to work through it. And that's the real test of, I mean, everyone's going to have fixed mindsets within stuff. I think in during my master's, you kind of hear it and when you talk about it, people are like, oh, like, why would anyone have a fixed mindset? Why put limits on yourselves? And then they use the example of like how many people have said, like, I'm not a good singer or I'm never going to be able to sing well or
Mm.
dance well. And it's like, well, right there is a perfect example of like a fixed mindset. Like, sure, you might not be a Billboard top 10 artist, but if you put the work in it, you probably could become a much better singer or dancer or in a school subject or whatever that might be. It's now the amount of work you're going to put towards it. And I think it also adds a lot of motivation and commitment for people knowing that they can actually
Hmm.
improve on stuff rather than thinking like, hey, this is where I'm at and this is where I'm going to stay.
Hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of times comes to, we all go through different experiences that we had through either early childhood, high school, or even during our work life, that we might have heard something from a friend or a family member or someone that was close to us that said you are not good at this, and for some reason we just believe that.
Yeah.
And there are so many aspects where if we all start to reflect on, okay, what are the things that I'm actually good at. And not to say that you need to have, a bright talent playing the piano, for example, right away, right? The first time that, that you touch it. Um, but just, okay, where is that idea coming from? Is that something that someone told you? Is that something that, you heard once and you believed it? Like, have you actually tried, to play the piano, play the guitar? Um, and it happens a lot with the Latin American players that I work with, and they happened to me as well when I was, trying to learn English, since Spanish is my first language. Like that's something when you are trying to learn a language that it's a constant battle that you have in your mind, right?
Mm.
Because you think, okay, you obviously have to learn new words, you have to learn how to specifically pronunciate specific words that are very difficult sometimes, and if you stop believing that you can get better, that's when you won't learn it, right? Especially when you're learning a new skill, and in this case the language. Something that I keep telling my athletes is just keep trying, keep trying, keep, watch a YouTube video, watch, listen to a song that you haven't heard before, trying to have a conversation with your teammate, even if it's something that lasts 30 seconds, right? Like take advantage of every opportunity. And at the end of the day, something that I noticed too is that we are too afraid of what other people think sometimes, and we kind of let our actions get dictated what so and so could say. So very, very important topic.
Yeah, no, I think it's getting a lot worse in the age of everyone being recorded or seen and media is being shown. There's a lot more, as you're kind of, I think, alluding to, like fear of failure or messing up or not looking good in front of others, that we've almost sometimes given up the chance to even try something. I know I've definitely fallen into that. I'm sure everyone has fallen into that where you don't want to make the mistake or be embarrassed or not look good at something in front of others. And yeah, I think we're kind of getting almost further to that of, hey, it has to be perfect. I always say that athletes, when they talk about something on social media or something they see, like I really try and emphasize like those are always the highlights. Like that's the highlight of someone's workout or performance. You tend not to see too much about what they don't do well. I kind of said like even when you see a lot of professional athletes post like an exercise. Like I think of Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens, right? Like they show his training workouts and it's like these insane things that he's doing, but even though he's putting in the work, which is awesome, like they're the highlight a lot of times of like the workout that he's doing. It's not him like rolling out like before he starts the workout, him with chains and a physio ball and some different variations of something that looks insane, but like once again, it's a highlight. And I think that's where we kind of get a false narrative. So we're getting nervous to try something. And I think that's the biggest thing you said. If we can try it and keep pursuing it, if it's something that is really wanted, then you can go and continue to see growth and get better. But you have to be willing to put yourself in those a little bit of uncomfortable positions to try and ultimately
Mhm.
probably fail at some points.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something to you that I think when we talk about fear of failure, like the only way to get through it is to actually fail, right? To
Yeah.
actually make those mistakes. So you can take some information about what happened, make the adjustments, and keep going. Players, I think you touched on it before too, like right now it's getting earlier and earlier when athletes are getting specialized in their
Mhm.
specific sport. There are so many times when I'm encounter professional athletes from a specific sport, and you throw them a ball from a different sport and they don't know how to play. They don't know how to, I don't want to say like play good, but they don't even have the coordination or the movements that would allow them to at least play, right?
Mhm.
Which, obviously, every person goes through different experiences. But what I found interesting too is that they're afraid of trying out. Like I remember perfectly, I was having a workshop for a soccer team a year ago, to kind of like get the workshop going. I had like a little basketball tournament for a couple of the players that started, and I remember that there were some that they were like, no, I don't want to play it. I don't want to play. I'm like, why not? I mean, I only played soccer, and they're 16 years old,
Yeah.
right? And they're already saying, no, 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 like I'm a soccer player, I'm not a basketball player. So I think that's something that, as you said, obviously the role that society plays and the opinions of others plays a factor into it. But the more that you kind of try to get away from all those negative thoughts and from that doubt that might come from other people, because a lot of times that self-doubt comes from listening to other people's doubts about what they could do, not what you could do, but what
Mhm.
they couldn't do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wild to see how much people don't want to put themselves out there. And I mean, I could definitely speak. I was definitely a kid like that. Like when it came to sports, I would definitely try and do stuff, but when it came to being more social or talking to people or putting yourself out there that way, like that was definitely a big fear or like doubt of mine growing up that has definitely improved, but definitely is still a work in progress of in social settings, in moments, even like at work, having to go and introduce yourself to a new person or being in groups and having conversations. Like that definitely still provokes a little bit of doubt and fear for myself. Like I said, vastly improved, but seeing it now, it's like, hey, like I probably did miss out on a lot of conversations or like relationships because I didn't put myself out there.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think we are all at fault in that
Yeah,
sense. I think we all, if we could go back now reflecting on it, we will be like, even if it's the teacher or the professor asking if we knew the answer
yeah,
for a specific problem, or if we see someone that we wanted to talk to, but for some reason we didn't do it because we weren't brave enough to actually get out of our comfort zone. And I think that's something that it's important for athletes to remember as well on those day-to-day activities where you have to get out of your comfort zone. It can be, like trying a different sport during the off season. It can be trying to learn a new skill, trying to learn a language, something that's going to get you out of your comfort zone. The more that you get yourself into these situations, the better that you're going to be prepared for when you have to deal with that during the games, right? Because we are going to fall back into what we know. We're gonna fall back into how we usually act. So, if we're afraid of asking someone for a date, or if we're afraid of asking someone for advice, what makes you think that when you see the right answer in the game, you're gonna said, okay, I'm gonna get out of my comfort zone, I'm gonna make that play, I'm gonna give my best here. Like in our day to day, we're training those part of our mind that allow us to just get out of our comfort zone and trying to find something better on the other side.
Yeah, I almost think it goes back to like the playing, right? Like you see a lot of athletes go, and when they're playing their sport, they're a lot tighter, they're a lot tenser, they're more nervous about what's going to happen. But then they go and play a different sport or something that they don't like care about as much, and they play much freer. They try things out to see if it works. They might mess up with it and fail, but they tried and wanted to see what it could be. Where on the other side, when it's something that matters more or they care more about, there's more of an impact. There's a lot more rigidity and stress that goes with it. So it's interesting to always watch someone try and throw or shoot or do what they do, and they go and play a different game like hacky sack or spike ball, and they're trying all these wild things, and sometimes it works, and that sparks the creativeness and the fun of it. But then they go and play their thing or what their job is, and they're
Mhm.
stiff as a board and trying to go through the motions because this counts now. I can't joke around or I can't move as freely or try something because it matters. If I mess up, like it could be what's perceived as like the end of the world in some type cases.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's about finding that space between doing everything that is going to allow you to perform at your best, right? Like either if that's putting the right thoughts into your mind, visualizing what you want to accomplish, doing a breathing exercise, kind of going through the things that you need to accomplish during the game or during that particular game. But in the moment that you are playing, let go of everything else. That is not just having fun and being fully focused on what you're doing in that moment. And I think what I've seen that there are a lot of athletes that they have great self-awareness skills, where they are really good at reflecting on the things that worked out during the game, the things that didn't. They're able to reflect on the things that they could do a little bit better than in the week, but they also fall into the trap at times of thinking too much about what they're thinking during those moments. I think it's about, trying to help them understand that it's a great process. They have a great skill, but when it's time to play, it's time to play, have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. The work's been put in, so now go and actually show the work you've put in. Let your body and eyes and take over the actual thing you're trying to do.
100%. And something more that I wanted to talk a little bit about as well. We kind of talked, you and I, a couple of weeks ago, but is the type of self-talk, specifically the types of negative self-talk that athletes commonly have. We talked a little bit about the catastrophizing, the all or none thinking. Are there any particular thinking patterns that you found out that either that's athletes in high school or the pro athletes that you work with, that they kind of have that are like very similar with each other?
I think a lot of, and I think this is more not just athletes, but people in general, it's very future focused thinking and
Mhm.
uh, with their self talk of they're kind of wishing or hoping for things in the future to happen this way or that way, or it could also be the negative piece of like, hey, if this doesn't happen. And I think a lot of that then causes a lot of anxiety that they're experiencing because they're very into the future. And that then goes and causes them to worry about it or push for it and try and get there. And that's where you want to try and get them back to like kind of the question you said with the rehab of like, what's the focus for today or what are you trying to do right now to be able to overcome that? And in terms of like strategies, I think a big piece, like you said, if it's catastrophizing or all or nothing thinking, I really like the question, like I said, questions before is like, what are the facts of like the situation right now? Because
Mm.
it gets you back to the present and it kind of lets your rational mind take over of, hey, the facts are facts of what's going on. And now I can be a little bit more clear with my thinking and not let my emotions and feelings dictate what I'm thinking. but more stick to like what's actually happening or what's around me to get back to that moment. And then you kind of make a plan of, okay, now what's the next step to take to keep moving forward to get to where you want to go. But I think that's like the hard part is it's a lot of wishing or dreaming or dreading and doubt of what's going to happen in the future.
Hmm. Yeah, see, and that's where a lot of the anxiety or the performance anxiety comes from, right? Like thinking too much about the future, not based on facts, mostly, as you mentioned. I think that's a great tool that athletes can use, right? If you're feeling overwhelmed by a specific situation, a particular game, even if you're having, a really bad week, what are you focusing on that moment? What are the facts that you have to make that bad prediction or that something bad it's gonna happen for you? And what I found out with athletes too is that when they tend to kind of like make a list either about the things that they're grateful for or the things that could work out for them, they tend to outbalance all the negative thinking and all those negative scenarios that they put their minds into.
Yeah, and I think people are starting to recognize more. But I remember in grad school, which is now like 4 or 5 years ago, it goes right, and they always talk about like the what ifs of a situation. What's cool is athletes now are starting to recognize like they go like, oh, like all the what if scenarios, like they even connect, they are starting to get the language of, hey, like this isn't a productive way to think. And also it provides nice insight for them of, hey, we're probably going to have more of a negative bias towards these what ifs. We can also play the other side of the coin of like, hey, have you ever thought of like what if it does go well or something does happen? And obviously we can counter those and go. We probably don't want them to get too far back and forth because then you can probably start overthinking a lot of like, well, what if this happens or what if that happens? Um, I think it made me laugh when I saw the movie, but like in Inside Out 2, which is all about
Mhm.
anxiety, there was like joy and there was anxiety. And they literally played the what if game in the movie where like joy was saying all the what ifs of the future that were good at the outcomes, and then the anxiety was playing all the what ifs of the negatives that could happen. And it was like, I don't know, like I'm sure many people watched that and just thought it was a nice like interaction, but being in this field, when I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, they just played like the what if game literally out for people to see on the big screen.
I think that's a great reminder for athletes and for everyone listening to the podcast of try not to play the what if game. And it's something about, I think, obviously the brain is trying to protect you, right, for what's coming, kind of like getting ready, getting you physically and mentally ready for what could happen, right? The problem is when your body overactivates and it starts to overthink about what could go wrongly. And we all have those moments where something bad happens, or we're going through a difficult time, and we have a friend that comes and says, hey, it's not like, it's not the end of the world. But in that moment, to you, even if you want to think positively, the chemistry that is going on in your body is making you feel that way, making you feel down, is making you feel kind of sad, angry, and sometimes it can be very challenging to actually say, okay, I'm not gonna play the what if game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's difficult because yeah, like you said, the brain's gonna want to keep trying to protect you with anxiety and think to the future and all the possible outcomes. But that's where we get in trouble because then, right, we can't predict the future. So it, in the moments, feels like the right thing to do, but in reality, it just kind of can be at times crippling.
Mhm. And I think that's why, coming back to what we talked about the breathing or having a physical act, something that could be helpful to keep yourself present. I had an athlete once that I was working with a couple of months ago. He was coming back from a knee injury, and he loved tattoos. Right. So something that we designed was, during the warm up, if you're feeling that your knee is bothering you, or you kind of have like these thoughts where you start to having doubts about if you're gonna be healthy or not, because he was in that last stage of his return to play process, so he was quite advanced. He was just getting ready to play with the team again. um so we kind of came into this routine of go back, touch your tattoo, right? Like, this tattoo means something to you, very important to you. Kind of like have that physical act when those thoughts comes, to keep yourself in the present, right? And it's so hard during the injuries when you're trying to recover, because again, your mind is trying to protect you and put in all those what ifs scenarios. So I think having something that can help you stay present can definitely help athletes kind of let go of those negative thoughts.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Matt, I'm curious to know. Obviously, you are a lifelong learner. We talked about different books. The chance that we had the time to talk. What do you think, or what would you say could be some books or authors or podcasts that athletes and coaches, or anyone that is interested into the mental performance world could, start reading, start listening to get some more information about it?
Hmm. I think that a great foundational book for really anyone is Atomic Habits by James Clear. I know he's well known. I know his book is well known. And I think he's like a top 10 newsletter that people are subscribed to in the world. But it is just it breaks down habit building in such simple ways. And really, all the stuff that I teach, that we teach, comes down to the habits that you do. And I think that book just makes it as simple as possible and breaks down how to get into stuff and also how to break bad habits, because that really is, whether you're playing a sport or your job, those little small behaviors build up and stack up to what you're actually doing. So I think that's a great foundational book for really anyone to read. A book that I just started reading. I've listened to a couple of summaries of it, but I'm just started to read is The Confident Mind by Dr. Nate Zinzer. He's the head of performance at West Point. Um, and so far, love it. I've recommended to a couple of our pro athletes, and the ones that have gotten through it have said it's been a really good book, really practical application, really breaks down confidence in a really great way, which is important because I think that's probably one of the main topics a lot of people want to talk about. So that book, um, by I think it's Mark Manson, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. That's, I
It's a
mean,
great book.
yeah, it's a book that I think it's really funny. It's great because it's a self-help book, but it's not your typical self-help book that goes into a lot of things that we're told that really don't actually help. So it really comes from what
Mhm,
seems like a negative viewpoint, but at its core, it's really trying to help you go and figure out what you value and what you care about, and then be able to measure how you're achieving that in a proper way. So it has a lot of great things, and it also makes you laugh a lot. I mean, even within high schoolers reading it, like they love that book in terms of just like, but because it's an expressive book for sure. Within that, and there are a lot of F words for sure in the beginning of it, but there's a purpose within it as well. And
mhm,
then if you're like a head of an organization or a team, Legacy by I think it's James Kerr. I want to say it's all about the all black team and their like culture
mhm,
and building their culture. Was a really good book that breaks down. There's a lot of concepts that are in psychology of your why and motivation and the importance of like everyone having a role on the team as well as no one's bigger than the team itself. So that was a
mhm.
great foundational book of like how to build a culture and an environment that can help foster a really good team. And in that case, the All Blacks being one of the best teams ever and legacies ever.
Mhm. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all those books, man. I think, yeah, our athletes have some homework to do. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, So, we're over an hour right now. And one of the questions that I always have for the people that I bring to the podcast is, obviously, you had, tremendous personal and professional experiences that got you to the way, to how you are right now, to where you are right now. So if you could go back, kind of like reflecting on your journey, and you could talk to your past self, what would be some pieces of advice that you will give to yourself?
I touched on it earlier. I definitely would say putting yourself out there is really important in whatever field or you're trying to do, because it's probably going to open up way more opportunities than you think they are going to. And even though in the moment it's really scary to kind of think of that, like I said, if it's reaching out to a coach or an organization or a friend, like you said, if it's a significant other, right? Like you tend to miss out on so many of those opportunities. And I think once you kind of tear down that fear of putting yourself out there and seeing people's reactions, it opens up so many doors. I mean, I definitely am someone who's not super into social media. So like I do force myself to go and like post. I mean, that's how we got connected through that of posting.
True.
And like it's something that like if you told 15, 16, 17-year-old me that you'll do like a weekly post, like I would think that's crazy. Like I'd be so nervous, and I definitely was super nervous doing it for the first time. But to see what it provides, and you also start to see like, hey, it's not as scary as you think. In a lot of situations, obviously not everything, but I think that's a big one that resounds for myself of someone who was more quiet, more to themselves. Putting yourself out there and trying things can bring a lot of joy and fun to your life and a lot better and deeper relationships for sure.
100%. It's that's I think that's a great advice, and something that we can all take some notes. And it's true. Sometimes you don't know what's on the other side of getting out of your comfort zone, and it can be painful sometimes. It can be tiring. It can be scary. But yeah, you never know what the other side can look like. So definitely worth trying.
Yeah, it's tough, but you
Yeah.
then it expands the comfort zone, so it allows you to then be more comfortable doing that, and then you try some new things and you see along the way. So, absolutely.
And you can go in. That's it. Love that advice, man. Okay, Matt. It's been awesome having you in the podcast with us today. If there are any athlete or coaches that would like to reach out, either to know more about the work that you do, or advice that you could give them as far as their mental performance processes or mental performance programs, how could they reach out to you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. It's M Rieger Mental Performance. I'm also on LinkedIn under Matt Rieger. Those would be the best forms of contact. Just because I'm on those more and I check those a lot more, and I think that's like a great way to engage for myself. I know LinkedIn, obviously, if it's more professional, Instagram, if there's probably more athletes within that, it just allows for a nice conversation along the way. And typically that's based off of something that's posted. And if there's any questions, I always check those. I always respond. And that would probably be the best form of communication.
Awesome. Sounds great, Matt. Well, it was awesome to have you here in the podcast. I always enjoy our conversations, and I think you gave some awesome advice for our athletes and coaches to improve that best version of themselves. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a great conversation.